So my name is Jeff Anderson. I go by Programmer Q on the internet, so it is what it is. I'm on Freenode all the time. I hang out in the NGINX channel, among others. And I'm a DevOps guy. I've been, tinkering with computers since I was about 10 years old, making websites and doing whatever. And now I do the same thing, but I get paid. I had worked with Apache as long as I can remember, and was really first exposed to NGINX back in 2010 when I started at HP. And I've been using it extensively ever since. So I've been in the NGINX game for 4.5 years-ish, I think. So I really enjoy it. It solves lots of problems. Now, the reason I named my talk NGINX Can Do That is because I've had this conversation with multiple people, and it's generally a positive thing. That I'm talking to a project manager for the development team I'm supporting, or one of the developers, and they need some feature they think that the ops group can help out, and I say, oh yeah, we can probably get that in pretty quickly. That's just an NGINX thing, and at some point in the conversation they go, oh, NGINX can do that, and that's a good thing. That means NGINX is solving real-world problems. So the side effect of that is we end up having very complex requirements for what our NGINX config files can do. Just a very long list of lots of small things. You end up with seemingly infinite requirements and complexity, which is, again, a good thing. But we have to be able to have a safety net to provide those features and provide that value without breaking things, because that's the risk anytime you make a change, of course, in the ops world and software development. So my story time is basically I was on several projects at HP and other places as well now where that exact thing happens. We need to support we'll say a Django Python application. So we've got application servers and we've got NGINX. Boom, easy, done. We can go home, right? So that's the way we would feel every time we took on a new project. Oh yeah, there we go, boom. NGINX saves the day. And I'd expect a very simple small config file like that. And then we're happy. We've like, this is how we feel. Yay, we did it. But unfortunately, that's when those requirements start coming on and just piling on and piling up. So yeah, I figured I'd include some memes in here just for fun, so I could look hip. But again, this is not obviously going to be our config file for long. This works in our development environment, but once we want to start adding things, that's going to change. So the first thing that we have to support is multiple environments. I had one project where I counted. We had 60 separate environments that I was supporting single-handedly. So, and nowadays with NGINX Plus, there are better ways to do this than what I'm going to talk about in my presentation. But there's lots of ways there's more than one ways to skin the cat. So the developers will want some piece of the application cached, or maybe I as an ops person want that feature. We'll want to restrict who can access different portions of the site. Maybe APIs are only allowed to be hit by internal locations rather than the internet at large. Everyone wants a maintenance page, but only after we go live with the site. Oh, now we need a maintenance page. So deploy 2 is when they want the maintenance page, and that's okay. Multiple upstreams. So what I mean by that is we have a big project. So our Java group here in this state is going to do the main site, and then we have some contractors down in South America, and they're doing this other branch. And then we have another team over here. So we have one site and lots of upstreams. So that's going to affect our NGINX config file. And the list keeps going. So non-production, well, if I'm a developer and I'm using the NGINX config file, I want to be able to turn off that lovely performance enhancing caching, because I'm making changes a lot, that gets in my way. So if I'm going to use your NGINX file, I have to be able to turn that off somehow. Another thing, I put maintenance page up here again because anytime we implement a maintenance page for our applications, we never actually look at it on non-production. So if we have some maintenance page specific lines in our config file and something happens and they no longer work, we're not going to notice that until it's on production. So, this other feature is one that I've had to use on multiple projects. We would outsource our QA team, and our corporate VPN wasn't something that they could get on, so they would need to be able to access staging or a development environment without having corporate VPN access. So we would have to figure out some way to allow them to have access without like getting Google indexing happening and stuff like that, or other nefarious indexers that ignore robots.txt. So we ended up doing like basic or digest auth for that quite a lot, which can bring its other problems later, as I think I've got that on a further slide. Production-specific requirements for our NGINX config file. We don't want to spend money on our staging or development environments. We don't want to have 24 nodes for a complete environment for anything but production. That's a common thing I've been told by management. So we need to have our NGINX file be able to be testable and usable elsewhere, and be able to support our multiple node configuration in production. And I put staging too, because I can usually get management to agree, yes, we need staging to match in node count as well, but obviously we're not going to have 10 nodes for the Vagrant environment for our junior developers or anything like that. Another thing that gets thrown in is we have this geographic redundancy. It kind of goes along with the additional nodes. Our NGINX config file might need to be different or take that into account. So, so this is just setting the stage for kind of the environment where I've felt like I needed to test my config files like they were a piece of software. CDN. We have CDNs sometimes, and sometimes we want SSL on or off. I had a lot more requirements on these slides than I thought. Sometimes the maintenance page is great, but when I put up the maintenance page and I need to see a health check or an admin API, and the maintenance page doesn't let me access that, that's another consideration. That basic auth, commonly we would turn that on for our test environments, and everyone's happy. They're like, okay, Google won't see it anymore, the internet can't get to it, and then 3 or 4 days later, hey, all our callbacks are failing with an unauthorized, what's going on? So we'd have to go in and add exceptions to that. Same thing, like we'd have application server rules, like /API/health check. Nagios is supposed to hit the application servers directly. Someone realizes on production they can hit API health check and get a random app server response back, and security folks go, oh my goodness, we probably don't want that. And so there's those considerations as well. So these are real requirements that I had on multiple projects. So I did look at one point, and we had a template for our config file that would get used to generate all the different config files for each of our environments. The template was about 4 pages printed. It was very long to handle all these different things and be able to handle all these cases properly. So when we would make a change, we were risking affecting any of those features because we are human and we can make mistakes. So in Kent Beck's book, Extreme Programming, I really like the little chapter heading for the chapter 18 heading, which is the testing chapter. We will write tests before we code, minute by minute. We will preserve these tests forever and run them all together frequently. So we wanted to start doing that for NGINX. we recognized that it would provide a lot of value and reduce problems on our big clunky deploys. So we said we have to test everything. We were testing our chef infrastructure code, our cookbooks, and we said, well, let's do at least some integration tests for NGINX. But we weren't quite sure how at first, because, and again, most of what I'm talking about I did back in, I want to say 2012, maybe early 20, or maybe a good chunk in 2013 as well. No, it was 2013. I just can't add on stage. So we sat down and we came up with a few different possibilities. Oh yeah, let me talk about continuous integration before I go down that other path. So running our tests frequently. Actually, did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Okay. So continuous integration, we already had in place. So these are just some of the continuous integration solutions that are out there if you've never done software testing. The one that I have the most experience with is Jenkins. So we were trying to run our tests in Jenkins and use that. So that's where most of my experience is from. And then since we were using Chef already and trying to have Chef help us manage NGINX, we used Test Kitchen, or I guess it's called Kitchen CI now. So we use those technologies to actually run our tests. And back when we did it, we had some problems that I'll visit later. Oh yeah, so this is just a thing about Test Kitchen. Shameless plug for Test Kitchen, because I think it's really a valuable piece of software as a DevOps engineer. So back to our original example. Our yay, we're done, our simple config file, and then we have to start adding those requirements on. So again, our simple config file. And the first thing, or the first requirement that I added was multiple environments, because that's always the first one that we want to make work. So again, this, if you're using NGINX Plus, you don't have to do this anymore, I believe. I'm pretty sure NGINX Plus has ways to support multiple environments, but the pattern that I've seen in multiple occasions is you end up using a template engine and you dynamically generate your config files at some point after you check in your template and before it actually runs on the server. So this is ERB syntax. You can use any templating engine. I've used Jinja too. I've used all kinds of stuff to templatize my NGINX config files, but I just chose ERB syntax. And consider these slides pseudocode, because I haven't tested them. They're just slides. So I'm iterating over all my upstreams, saying server, and then host, and that should appear in line. And then same thing, I've got server name down here. Am I missing a slide? I might be missing a slide. Oh well. Yeah, I was supposed to try and have a slide side by side showing what that looks like, but it's not here. Oh no. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. Okay, so that's my template. And then my strategy is, once it's generated, I'm going to do the syntax check. And I could make assertions on the output with regular expressions, which is helpful, but not necessarily the best way to do it. Or I could output all those generated tests to like a golden image and do what's known as approvals testing. So anytime I make a change to the template, my test breaks, and then I have to manually go in and copy the new output to the golden image. And by doing that, I'm approving that this change is good. So that alone is a safety net that can catch many problems. Because again, we're trying to help ourselves and keep ourselves from making mistakes. Again, keeping that template in mind, we've got some just JSON data. I've got a production environment and a staging environment. And then I take that and I render it with my template. Yeah, this is the slide I thought I lost. So now that template, 2 sets of data, and we have 2 config files that work. And now I can infinitely configure my multiple environments. So as long as my template generation is good, then I'm good. So And I've already said all this. Okay, so yeah, syntax error checking. Ideally, my Jenkins job is going to, on check-in, try generating it with some dummy data, or maybe I've grabbed some real data, and then it's going to inspect output and make sure that I don't break things, because I'm human, and I can make mistakes, and I have some good stories about that too. So here's a more complex example. So here's, again, production and staging, but I have more metadata. So I have this no access locations piece of metadata. So again, with that API health check example that I mentioned earlier, I don't want the main site to have that accessible. I want it to be gone. And I can configure it. I can give it a list of as many locations as I want to not actually be accessible. Same thing with that basic auth for our QA and environments where I have people that need to access it. On production, I want that off, so I set that to false. And on staging, I do set like a file name for the HT password, and I can assign passwords with whatever strategy I want. And since some things we want accessible without the basic auth, we have to have a way to keep those out. So callbacks work, maybe, oh, I've got an RSS example here. And then, yeah, that's pretty much the same as our previous example. So, so this would be the template for the more complex example. And this is, again, just kind of pseudocode, not tested. So I'm iterating over my no access locations, setting location blocks to return 404. Maybe there's a better way to do it, but just for sake of example, that's what I'll do. And then same thing with basic auth. If that is set, then I can write out my basic auth. And then I have separate location blocks for my excluded paths for basic auth, so that this location gets used instead of the one that's got basic auth. And that's kind of the first way to try it out, is you manually verify that your config generators work. And that gets you some things. So this other strategy that I've done is really more the bread and butter of what I think was interesting. So I'm going to generate the config, and then I'm actually going to turn NGINX on using that config. I'm going to run it. And then I'm going to start sending requests to it and making assertions on its output. So the way that we approach this is we had our NGINX chef cookbook that would write out our template, and we would run chef with different parameters. And then I think we're using mini test chef or something like that, and we would have it shell out with curl, and then we would actually do the assertions. So in this example, some more just basic like fake data, server name, testapp.example.com, and then this IP access thing, maybe that's I only want /admin to be accessible from 127.0.0.1. And then I can do curls, and if I hit this IP address, my source IP address is going to look like not 127.0.0.1, so I would expect a 404. But if I do hit it on 127.0.0.1, I would expect a 502 because I'm not running the application. I'm only running NGINX alone on a test server. So I would expect to have a dummy upstream that just fails. So I expect, but I'm more interested in the fact that it's a 404 instead of a 502 because I'm actively denying that for non-127.0.0.1. So with this test, I can show that my config generator actually does handle IP-based restrictions based on dummy data. So in production, this might actually be, it wouldn't be 127.0.0.1 that I feed in. It would be whatever my company network range is that I feed in, and then I could go from there. So this testing approach just proves that my config generator and the config file actually does what it's configured to do. So hopefully that makes sense and isn't too hand wavy. I know I'm waving my hands. So another big feature that I've done on multiple projects is the maintenance page, because we do deploys. We have we've got an application that needs database migrations, and those can take a long time. So we want to put the maintenance page up before we run them. So my favorite implementation of the maintenance page is I have a file in the document root called maintenance-on, and if that exists, the NGINX config will return a 503, and then ideally I'll have a 503 handler set for or to actually show my maintenance page, and I've done that on multiple projects. All right, so again with the 502, so here I'm making sure that the maintenance on file isn't there, just to be explicit. And then I send this curl in to my test bed NGINX. Since I don't have an upstream, I expect a 502. And then I touch the maintenance file, and then I run the same request, and this time I expect a 503. So that actually got us quite a lot of value. And I do remember when I first started writing some of these tests, and my coworkers came over and they're like, wait, why the 502? And it was weird, but once I explained it to them, they went, oh, okay, and that makes sense. So some other options for doing integration on NGINX that I have heard of or seen or have thought about. I actually had a coworker do this. I never understood his code, but you would fire up NGINX with strace if you're familiar with that. It just, if you're not, it's strace on Linux. You fire up a program, and then it will tell you the system calls it makes. So it's a very useful debugging tool. So in his case, my coworker would fire it up, send a request to it, and watch it actually try to make to actually try to do the right thing, because he was loading it up with like the production config file. So he would wait for strace to try and open a connection to the right upstream. So he didn't care that it was a 502. He just waited for connect to the right port at the right host, and after that he would just kill the process. So he wouldn't even let NGINX finish. That was a really interesting way. He was motivated to do that on a project that I wasn't on directly, because he needed to refactor the config generator and wanted to make sure that, again, he wanted to make sure he didn't break production without realizing it, because it's very easy to, when you have slightly different configs everywhere, to inadvertently make a change that is far-reaching. Another possible method is you could use something like proxy chains or tsocks, where it's kind of, you run a program with networking libraries changed out from underneath it, so you could, so when NGINX goes to make an upstream request, it gets sent through your proxy server, and then you could have some dummy program that can handle that, and then use that as an assertion framework. I considered that when I first started doing this, but it was just too complex for not giving me much more value over my curl method. The final thing is you could actually configure the upstreams directly in NGINX to like, you could have a custom web server running, so you wouldn't use a proxifier, but you could do the same thing. You would make a request, watch NGINX, try to make the right upstream requests, and then since you are the web server, you can make assertions. But again, that seemed less helpful than just using the curl and living with the 502. Now, as much value as the curl method did give me, I don't think that's an end-all be-all solution, but I would like to see a testing framework where I can sit down, I can describe what I want my NGINX config to do, and then as I implement my NGINX config, I can watch my tests go from red to green. In another talk, I think someone mentioned some kind of testing framework, so I've got homework to do now. But I didn't catch enough because I was worried about my talk instead of theirs. I'm also hopeful that maybe someone else can think of something even better. Because to me, NGINX config files are code. And if I'm a believer in extreme programming and test-driven development, I should really be testing my NGINX config in a similar way. Now, I do have a bit of a demo figured out because I want to kind of show the process a little bit. So I want to make sure, is this text readable? Do I need to adjust color scheme? Can I make it smaller? Or is it good? I could make it smaller. Okay, if that works, I'll give it a shot. So I've got this little, I've got a Docker file set up. If you're not familiar with Docker, that's okay. The Docker file pretty much reads like bash. So I've got this image where I've installed NGINX and Git and curl. And then I'm installing this project called Bash Automated Testing System, or BATS. Test Kitchen in the chef world, the first testing framework they supported was BATS. So that's when I first got my first exposure. I thought about doing Test Kitchen for this demo, but I wanted to make this more about the NGINX and the testing process rather than Test Kitchen, even though I like Test Kitchen. So this line installs BATS for me. I have a /www document root, and I've got this pre-canned. This is what the finished config file looks like. So I'll comment that out and develop it again. And then my BATS tests. Oh, wow, that's lots of wrap, isn't it? So basically a BATS test looks like, here's a short one that fits on the screen. So I have this bracket. I'm telling it what to run, and then I can actually this is essentially an assertion. I'm making sure that which NGINX has a status code equal to 0. And then if NGINX is not installed, this would fail. So I can run that. So the way that I'm running this test is I'm building the Docker image based on the Docker file, and that it installs NGINX and Git and curl, and then it takes my files and adds it to the image, and then I actually run it, and then the command I'm running is here. So bin bash, I'm starting NGINX, and then I'm running BATS on my BATS file. So that's how my demo works. So I'm going to go ahead and run that now. So right now, with my complete tests written and my NGINX config file, I have 6 tests all successful. So now I'm going to go ahead and comment everything out. And for my BATS tests, I'm going to comment all but the top test. To be fair, when you write a test, you would want a red. I don't want to go change my Docker file, because all this first test is doing is asserting that NGINX is installed. So when I first did this, my to make this red test green, I just added install NGINX to my Docker file. So my next test is going to be, I'm going to do my crazy 502 thing to make sure that it's trying to hit an upstream. So if I run this test again, I've got a red test, so perfect. So I want a 502, so I'm going to only uncomment the stuff that I need to get that 502. So I've got just a basic listen, server name, and I've got my location block with proxy pass. So everyone agrees that should probably get me my 502 since I'm not running. Perfect, I've got a green test now. So now I can write my next test. So now I'm going to test that touching this maintenance on file actually causes that 503 to happen, and then I'm going to clean up. So if I run that now, I have a failure. Perfect. I've got a red test. So my code for the maintenance page is here. And I think that's all I have to do. Actually, it's not, but I'm going to run my test anyway. It's still a 503 because I haven't set my document root. So I can, oh yes, I need to fix my document root. Run it again, and now I have my green, so that's good. So my next test will be, oh yeah, that's right. So this next test, I have to tell another story a bit. We had about 3 or 5 different services. I was in charge of 1 or 2 of them, and I had some coworkers that were in charge of another 1 or 2. And we all had a common authentication piece that none of us controlled. So when that went down, we would call our NOC and say, hey, can you put up the maintenance page, which should be an easy, quick thing. But we had 4 NGINX servers, and they had 4 NGINX servers, and the NOC would have to SSH into each one individually, and they weren't necessarily power sysadmin users, so they didn't have cluster SSH or similar tools set up, and they were constantly rotating through. So we wanted something like this. We wanted them to be able to come in, click a button, hey, maintenance page on, boom, click it, and the maintenance page is up. So we would have just used SSH as a backend, but our management and our security team didn't like the thought of some rogue web server SSHing in and messing with our stuff. So we said, well, what if we use essentially an API and do it that way? So we came up with this idea that we could webdav put and delete that maintenance on file. And so I actually test drove that feature in our NGINX config file, so I'm trying to recreate that here. So this test here, I'm trying to do a put. And I'm expecting a 401 because I want this to be password protected. I don't want just anything. I think in the real implementation, we at least use digest auth over HTTPS. This example, I'm only using HTTP and basic auth. But I want a 401 if I don't include a username and password. And then if I do include the right username and password, I want that lovely 201. And then after I do that put, I would expect a 503. So those are all the requirements that we wanted to have. So run my tests. I've got a red. So I've got my dav method put, so I can now do a put. And I did have the username in there, so I'm going to do this as well. When I first developed this, I probably would have broken this out into 2 tests, but ended up with them reduced to 1. So run that. I've got a green. Oh, I've got a location. I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, I see what's going on. Thanks. All right, so we've got that green test now. So the next requirement is I also want to be able to take NGINX out of maintenance mode. So I want both buttons to work, so I want to be able to delete. Same thing if I don't have authentication, 401. If a successful delete in WebDAV, I would expect a 204. And then I should be back on the 502 for that weird thing instead of a 503. So let's watch that test go red. So now I can add delete to my DAV methods. Run that again, it should go green. Now when I designed this feature, I talked with the security department and said, hey, I want to use WebDAV for this thing, and then here's how I'm doing the security, and it'll be IP and all this. And he was okay with all that, but he went on to say, go ahead and disable the other WebDAV methods, because we had had an actual security breach where on another project, someone had DAV on, had all methods unauthenticated, and we got some interesting pictures on one of our legacy sites. So he wanted me to make sure it was secured fairly well. So I was given the additional requirement of make sure the other DAV methods are definitely disabled. So I said, great, I'll write a test, and as long as we're running these tests regularly, we can assert over time that we don't have that break inadvertently and have a repeat. So get should not work. This is actually a head with this capital I in the curl, turns that into a head request. Prop find and post should all be 403s. So go in here and deny all, limit except put delete. Run that. Oh, I didn't run the red test. Let me do that real quick. Why not? So there's the red. Oops. And ta-da, we've got an NGINX config file where we can remotely put up and take down the maintenance page. We've test-driven it. I could take this and put it into Jenkins. My coworkers can refactor it. They can add things, and as long as they don't break the tests, then we know that we've preserved the functionality, and that's the idea anyway. I think I have just a few more minutes. Are there any questions? All right, well, let's call it then, and thanks for coming and listening to me. So.